Welcome everybody to this episode of the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. My name is Kevin Rafuse. Usually joining me is my co-host, of course, Justin Cousart. He actually just got married. We talked about that at the end of last episode. So quite the excuse for not being on this episode, to say the least. And then Justin, of course, is going on his honeymoon. But congratulations to our pal Justin. In the meantime, filling in on this episode, our pal Sam B. Albuquerque, host of the Take a Left at Albuquerque podcast. Follow him on Twitter at Sam B. Albuquerque. You can get all those columns in there, stuff too, as you're writing, as well as you continue your big J journalism training at Northwestern right now.
Yeah, man, it's exciting. I'm working on an article now about West Ham and Newcastle, so it should be fun. Which
There
on
we
the
go.
surface seems like the worst game to talk about, but it actually has these huge ramifications for the rest of the league, and I'm excited to write it out. I'm actually going to start it in a little bit, probably right after we record. So
Yeah, there we go. And we'll get into some soccer with Sam too later. For anyone who doesn't know and who follows my Twitter and sees Chelsea tweets now, you can blame Sam. Sam is not a Chelsea fan. Sam's actually an Arsenal fan, but you can blame him for like getting me back, or well, not really getting me back, but getting me into soccer. I've definitely watched the World Cup in the past, but not to the level that I am now. But yeah, we'll get into some soccer stuff at the end of the episode. Got a lot to talk about, of course. LaMarcus Aldridge retiring, shocking the NBA. Unfortunately, a pair of injuries as well. Jamal Murray with torn ACL now out for the season and potentially all of next too. We'll get into that, as well as Donovan Mitchell with the ankle sprain. That's something that looked a lot worse, thankfully a little bit better. But we'll talk about basically the implications on the Western Conference. Of course, talk Sam's Lakers as well, who we think can challenge them. And like I said, get into a little bit of soccer at the end of the episode. Leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad. We'll read them on the podcast. Follow the YouTube page, Drive and Dish NBA podcast. You can find all the video versions of the podcast there. Stream us if you're chilling at work. Anywhere else you can find a podcast: Google Play Store, Amazon Music, Spreaker, TuneIn, Player FM, Stitcher. All those places you can find us, no matter what you're doing. And hey, stay tuned later on in the podcast as well. We'll be giving away $25 NBA Store gift cards. Find out how you can win. Sam doesn't actually know that, but he knows now. And so we'll just get into that. We'll get into that later. You'll find out how you can win. But now, a word from our sponsors. All right, so I mean, it's really crazy because only 2 or 3 episodes ago we were talking about LaMarcus Aldridge getting signed, getting the buyout with the San Antonio Spurs and going to Brooklyn. Of course, people had all sorts of memes about it with the Infinity Stones and just the sheer number of All-Star appearances that are on that roster. Of course, between him and Kyrie and KD and Harden and Blake Griffin. And only 5 games into his tenure, we get a true Woj bomb. And this came out in a statement from LaMarcus Aldridge. So it always cracks me up. It's like all these people are saying it as sources. It's like, yo, your source is the guy himself. You put it online. But LaMarcus Aldridge has an irregular heartbeat. And so he decided, or, this came up in a game recently. And he basically has just decided to call it a career. Doesn't want to continue on, doesn't want to finish out the season. So LaMarcus Aldridge is officially retiring. 7 All-Star appearances, 5 All-NBA appearances. Of course, a long, career between Portland and San Antonio. I think Portland, we probably would agree, is his most important tenure. But I mean, wow, it's just. I mean, obviously, prayers up to LaMarcus Aldridge first off, and we're glad that he caught this and is taking care of it, and is, this didn't get worse. We've seen, unfortunately, at the college level and the G League situations where, this comes out of nowhere. I mean, I think the initial comparison, of course, is Chris Bosh recently, where he had blood clots and was forced to retire and early. But really a crazy turn of events this is a guy who had joined Brooklyn to obviously try to compete for a chance to win an NBA title before he ends up and hangs up his career. And obviously just an unfortunate situation where he has to call it quits early.
yeah, no, it sucks because this guy has kind of always been chasing a title, right? He goes to San Antonio because he thought that's what the best organization would get the best out of him. You get the best coach and you get to be, sort of the next Tim Duncan. And it doesn't work out there. Obviously, they trade Kawhi, and then there's DeMar DeRozan and him. And obviously that pairing was not, what it was supposed to be. And then he was like, okay, finally, I'm getting out of San Antonio. I'm going to go to the Brooklyn Nets and finally win my championship. And this kind of comes out, and obviously he made the right call. Like, basketball is not worth your life, but it still sucks because these guys dedicate their entire lives. Like, LaMarcus has been in the league for 15 years. He got drafted in 2006. Like, that's how long he's been trying to get this title, and it felt like he was finally going to get there this year, or at least get to a finals. Who knows if they would have beat my Lakers? But it was his best opportunity to win an NBA championship. And, it sucks for him, but he made the right decision. It's just a sad, circumstance for as much as we want to make a joke about the Infinity Stones and the Avengers Assemble thing for the Brooklyn Nets. It's still a guy who has spent 15 years, a majority of his life, chasing a championship. And it was going to be his best opportunity to get there. And it sucks that this came down. And again, made the right decision, but it's just tough luck, and you feel bad for the guy.
Yeah, absolutely. At least though, I mean, I do take a little bit of solace, like you said, in the fact that, this is a guy who got drafted in 2006, so he's had a pretty long career. Really his best years came with Portland. 5 straight All-Star appearances from 2011 to 2016, and then he had 2 with the Spurs as well in 2017 and 2018. Really the king of the mid-range. There's that stat of, I think, from the left block, where LaMarcus Aldridge just has the most points scored since 2000. A guy who, in a league that, of course, is ever evolving and has become so much, of the 3-point and dunk league, LaMarcus Aldridge was kind of the last master of this art that's kind of gone away a little bit, the king of this mid-range game. Played a ton of meaningful I mean, I remember that series with Portland against Houston, where he was the best player on the floor. And that, with the series that featured James Harden and Dame Lillard, he was that guy. Dame Lillard is already calling for his jersey to get retired in Portland. I can certainly make the case for that. He was really good for them for a while, and maybe we'll see that down the line. But yeah, like you said, this is just super unfortunate, because I think, he's played a ton of playoff basketball, but this is a real chance to get to the finals. None of those Portland teams or San Antonio teams were knocking on the door. He kind of caught the tail end of that San Antonio dynasty. And so, with Brooklyn still the favorites to win the Eastern Conference, again, you got to beat Philly, you got to beat Milwaukee. But at this point, I would think everyone would agree that they're the favorites, assuming health. We've talked about that on the pod a ton. But in terms of their X's and O's right now, of course, Brooklyn will have to lean on Nick Claxton a little bit more. You still got DeAndre Jordan in the mix. So one of the things we kind of talked about was, I get why Brooklyn signed LaMarcus Aldridge, but you wondered how he would even fit in this offense necessarily. And for me, I know whenever I watch Nick Claxton, this is a guy that I think they should be giving more minutes. It almost seems like Brooklyn is going to stumble into something good by accident.
Yeah, I mean, it really, because his game was very ball dominant. Like we talked about, that mid-range game, when he's most effective is when he's front up against a defender, and he can kind of do that dribble and shoot over you because he's so long and tall. So when you fit that into a Brooklyn system, you're not going to go to him in the mid post every time unless it's the second unit. So you want a guy who's going to do the dirty work, like a Nick Claxton, who's hyper athletic, grab rebounds, play off the pick and roll. Harden can find him off a pick and roll and just jam the ball, sort of like Clint Capella did with the Rockets. So I think if you lean into that more, it's really, you bring in LaMarcus because your 8th or 9th guy is a 5-time All NBA caliber player. Like, granted, he wasn't great this season. He was benched from San Antonio. Last year he averaged what, 18 points a game, almost 19 points a game last season. And a guy who can do that in the NBA, you always are going to bring him in, even if it doesn't fit perfectly. But he's got experience, and he can get you a bucket. You see what the Lakers are dealing with now with injuries. Like, imagine, guys who have been prone to injuries, and Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. Like, imagine those guys go down. You have a guy who's capable of putting up buckets, even if it's out of your system. Like, I get why you do that. But if everyone's healthy, Nick Claxton is clearly the better fit for that offense.
Yeah, and that's, to me, that's the most important thing. I mean, I would say it's the same thing with DeAndre Jordan. Like, to me, when they're playing DeAndre Jordan over Nick Claxton, it's something that I mean, he was awesome in the game against Philly the other night, and that was the other reason I think Brooklyn is so dangerous. I mean, that's a game where only Kyrie played. You had no Kevin Durant. You still don't have James Harden, and they went out and basically took it down to the final bucket. I mean, they just have so many good role players. I mean, Alize Johnson was phenomenal the other night. Bruce Brown was phenomenal the other night. So I don't know. I mean, and that's just why I'm so high on Brooklyn, is I think there's just and of course they will, like you said, I get that point too. It is a war of attrition. LaMarcus Aldridge was a guy who could go in and win you games. And in an absence where they don't have their stars, he can get you buckets, even if he plays a more antiquated system. It's the same thing that we have, the discussion we had with DeRozan in San Antonio, where, maybe they play an antiquated game, but if it's still winning you games and it's keeping you in the mix, like, you can't, it's not a bad shot if they're making it all the time. And LaMarcus Aldridge still had have the capabilities to do that. Again, I think if they play Claxton more minutes, because when Aldridge is healthy, again, 5 game small sample size, but they were giving all the minutes to him and DeAndre Jordan. I mean, I would even argue that if you were going to have LaMarcus still, you could have given it to LaMarcus and Claxton. But now I just think by proxy, you might be better again. I think, put it this way, like I don't think, again, no disrespect to LaMarcus Aldridge, because like I said, we're trying to highlight the great parts of his career more than anything. But in terms of this particular Brooklyn team, I'm not super concerned about it, to be honest.
Yeah, and I mean that's a fair assessment of where Brooklyn is going, what they need, and what they're doing. I don't think it affects their championship run. But if you're a team like when LaMarcus was available, a lot of teams wanted him, and that kind of to me proves the reasoning behind going out and getting him just for that specific point. Like you're taking him away from your competition, and you're getting a guy who can give you buckets, but him leaving, him retiring isn't going to stop the Brooklyn Nets from winning the East. It was just going to give them another option in case something happened. It was the fire extinguisher behind the glass, like break in case of emergency. And that's why you make that move. But if there's no emergency, if there's no, there's no need for a fire extinguisher if there's no fire. And if Harden and KD and Claxton and even, and Kyrie are healthy, then there's no need for a fire extinguisher. And that's how I viewed the LaMarcus Aldridge signing.
Yeah, no, I actually agree with that. I like that analogy a lot. Unfortunately, because I don't want to say this is a fire. That's extremely unfair, but it's just so disappointing for Denver, I guess, as we get into the next situation with Jamal Murray.
This is a fire.
Well, it's a fire, but it's just so disappointing, and that's where we get as we get into the injury suck portion of the podcast. Jamal Murray has torn his ACL. He's out for the year. Unfortunately, because of the timing, he likely, I mean, an ACL is a full year injury. We've seen it with Klay Thompson. We've seen it here in Orlando with Jonathan Isaac and now Markelle Fultz as well. This is a situation where we may not now see Jamal Murray until May or June next year, which in theory could be the time for a playoff run. So I don't want to discount that. But this season, we talked last episode about kind of the state of the Western Conference. And, I hate to be repetitive, but we're all going to get into it a little bit more because so much has changed, unfortunately. But, with Jamal Murray out, this is a Denver team that was playing its best basketball of the year. Michael Porter Jr. has been absolutely killing it the last 2 months. Nikola Jokic is, to me, the MVP right now. I know that's something we'll get into that a little bit later, too, because I want to get your take on that because that's been really debated this week.
I have one player that I want to talk about the MVP debate. We'll wait. We'll take that. We'll take that later. It's a little bit out of left field, and it's not going to be the MVP, but it's a debate about semantics, and we'll get to that later.
Okay, all right. So it's a little tease for later in the episode, but for Jamal Murray and for Denver, who ever since the Aaron Gordon trade as well, it truly feels like, I mean, to me, they were playing like the second best team in the Western Conference. It felt like almost at points that we could be on a collision course for a rematch in the conference finals, assuming health for the Lakers. Now you lose that second score, and again, Michael Porter Jr.'s emergence as a scorer this year and his continued improvement in this season for him. It helps with some of that. And I still think Aaron Gordon is perfect in the role that he's playing right now and just playing that rim running role for Denver. But there's no doubt about it. With just Jamal Murray, he's that guy that you can rely on at the end of games to get a bucket. We saw it in the bubble last year. We, of course, saw it this year. And it's so disappointing because for Denver, I mean, this is a team who, when we talk about, again, I think the Lakers, as I said on last podcast, when fully healthy, are the best team in the NBA and the best team in the Western Conference there by proxy as well. But in that second tier, you have Utah and you have Phoenix and you have the Clippers and you have Denver and you have maybe to a lesser extent Portland, but I still think Portland is kind of in that sleeper tier as well. For me with Denver, it just feels like, I guess what's disappointing is that I think this is a real opportunity for them. I mean, this is a situation where if you get by the Lakers, you could talk this team into winning the finals at that point. Runs like this and windows like this don't necessarily come along very often, especially when we said that Jokic is playing at an MVP level as well. And now with Jamal Murray, it drops them out of that contention for me. I mean, we're talking about they could be done as soon as the first round. And it's just so damn disappointing, I guess, is what it comes down to. I mean, this is a bright young star, somebody who is a really good kid on and off the court, somebody that is easy to root for, a Denver team that's super fun to watch. And it's just gutting.
Yeah, and to me, I think about why I call this a fire and why I call this an emergency is when You take Jamal Murray off this team. Now Michael Porter Jr. becomes your second scorer. His necessity to be on the court and play meaningful minutes is now becomes your priority if you're Mike Malone. And once that happens, there's a reason Michael Porter Jr. isn't playing that much, or he hasn't been playing that much throughout his early portion of his career, is because he can't play defense. He gets lost all the time on defense. It pisses Mike Malone off more than I think anything else that this team does. And so now that you need his scoring, because he's averaging like 16, 18 points a game, you're losing 21 with Jamal. So you need Michael Porter Jr. to now step up and score more points. That means he has to be on the floor a longer time, and that gives you more opportunity to get lost defensively. And then once you're relying on Michael Porter Jr. offensively, you're also losing buckets on the other side because he can't play a lick of defense. And so it's unfortunate because this team has every part, I think, that it needs to compete for a championship. It has a guy who the system revolves around in Jokic, and that guy is the most important piece. Everyone knows it. But without Murray, you are now relying on flawed pieces. Murray wasn't, a great defender, but he played within the system well, whereas Michael Porter Jr. does not within that defensive system. So it really comes down to the guys you're relying on are flawed. Aaron Gordon was perfect for that fourth or fifth scorer role, that prime defender role. Now you're going to ask him to get more buckets. He's not perfect for that. Like we saw it in Orlando when he's the third, guy on your team scoring buckets. It's not going to work out. Will Barton, same way. Like he's not going to go out there and score 20 to 30 points a game for you. It sucks because that team was built right. Jamal Murray was really ascending as a player. We saw it last year in the playoffs. He really came on strong towards, now in this season. Started off a little slow. So did this entire team. And Jokic is in MVP form, like you mentioned. So it's unfortunate because they have every piece. And I think it's an emergency because it's not going to work out without Murray, I think. Because the more Porter you have, the worse defensively you're going to be.
No, and I agree with that. And this is a situation too where even some of the guard depth is gone. I mean, we love that Aaron Gordon trade, but look at it where a guy like Gary Harris could have been super useful, and now unfortunately he's just not on the roster anymore. I mean, you're gonna rely on different players. Monte Morris is a guy who's going to have to step up. They're going to rely on a little bit more, but it's just there's a big question mark now for me. Like they have, like you said, that great center to build around. They have that key guy on offense in Nikola Jokic. Their forward depth is fine now. Like I feel good about the forwards. Like you said, I like Will Barton, but I don't necessarily like him in that increased offensive role. And that's where it just gets tough for me. And I do think when I look at Phoenix, when I look at Utah, when I look at the Clippers, I do think they're significantly better than this team as constructed. Maybe Michael Porter Jr. steps it up a little bit on the defensive end, but like you said, I just don't think they have enough firepower now, which is it's unfortunate. They needed that Murray scoring late in games, and they just Murray played that Robin role extremely well. Like everyone knows Jokic is Batman, but Jamal Murray is the perfect Robin. He fits that game. He complements the style of basketball that Mike Malone is looking to play. And now, like we said, they're not going to have him for the playoffs now, and there's a chance they may not have him until the playoffs next year. Who knows what that seeding fight is going to look like? So any run they're potentially going to go on, it may get exponentially harder. We know how the West is year in and year out. So it's really a disappointing situation for Denver. There's no other way around it. Again, prayers up for Jamal Murray. We hope he gets hopefully next year around playoff times, we're talking about him returning, and that he's just not out for the entire season at this point. Switching over to Utah now, Donovan Mitchell, badly sprained ankle. Still really no timetable, I guess, for when he's going to come back. The x-rays came back negative, which is the most important thing. There's no structural damage. It looked awful. So this was great. It was really, really obviously a blessing for Utah. We could have been talking very well about the same type of situation with Denver, where I think they dropped down the standings. I think you're looking at them slide in maybe as low as fifth or sixth now, and again taking that first round exit. I think they could have been the same thing with Utah. Now Utah, it's the number one seed. They've got quite a cushion built in right now, so I think that's the good thing for them. Is that they can afford a little bit of room to slide. It still looks like they'll have home court. But I mean, I don't know. I don't expect to see Donovan Mitchell before the playoffs. Put it that way. We're about a month away at this point. Or do we think he comes back before then? And what do we think about them staying afloat in the meantime? I guess how far do you think they can slide?
It's interesting because he's the best player on the best team, right? And he's averaging what, 26 a game. But the conversation around the media haven't been what you would think the best player on the best team that's averaging 26 a game would be, which would be MVP conversation. I don't think anybody's talked about Donovan Mitchell as an MVP, right? Like
Yeah.
I've brought up like if he averaged more points, he would be in that conversation, but no one else has, even though he's averaging the same amount of points as Jokic. There's a reason for that. The reason is that team is so good. Like
Hmm.
he usually takes the final shot, but not every possession runs through him. Like a lot of guys initiate offense. Conley, Ingles, you can even put Bogdanovich in there who initiate offense, who create offense, who are a vital piece, a vital cog in that machine. So I don't think Utah are going to miss him direly in this late regular season portion right now. I still think they could keep the number 1 seed. I still think they could be in that conversation for the 2 or 3 seed if they drop down. They're not going to be 100%, you know, terrible without him for before the playoffs start. So I would probably, keep him on the bench until he's ready to go. Like why risk any sort of thing right now with it when this team can further gel together without him, and then when he is ready, he can just be that guy who gets buckets for you. So I think it's a big deal, but it obviously could have been a lot worse. But I don't think Utah are in a terrible position without him, even though he does average, which is crazy to say about a player who averages 26 points a game.
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly their number one, like we said, and that's the issue. But if he's healthy for the playoffs, I mean, there is a chance that they slide. They're only a game and a half up on Phoenix right now, and they're only 3.5 up on the Clippers. And so I do think seeding matters a little bit. Like you want to have as many home playoffs series as possible. But if everybody is healthy, like you said, the rest of the team is so good. We obviously know how great Rudy Gobert is defensively, but everybody you just named, Mike Conley looks like we expected when he was when they signed him last year. He's playing that role to perfection. Bogdanovich is really solid. Joe Ingles has been great off the bench for them this year. Who's the Jordan Clarkson? Jordan Clarkson could
Yeah,
very well
Jordan
be sixth
Clarkson.
man of the year this
Did
year. I
you
mean,
did
he's
you
been.
watch that Laker game the other day? I think it was yesterday, actually.
Yeah. I watched
It
a
was
little bit
Dennis
of it.
Dennis Schroeder and Jordan Clarkson going back to back in the fourth quarter to send it to overtime. It was when I tuned into that game, I was like, this is so weird because these are two bench players who are not supposed to be the primary scorers on this team. But this game is so much fun, even though it's not necessarily the primary stars. It was hilarious to watch them go back and forth. And they were and both coaches were like, Schroeder, you get to do everything, and Jordan Clarkson, you get to do everything. Like nothing else, nobody else touched the ball. It was hilarious.
Well, they're two players. It's like you know how it is with them. They're gunners. Like they have very high confidence in themselves in the offensive end. And it's like, look, when they get going, feed them. It's like sometimes, obviously I worry about that style of player sometimes in certain systems because it's like, look, I don't need a bad shot if you're not playing within the flow of the offense. But I mean, especially for Utah, that's been exactly what they need this year. Like that, you just need a guy who can score. Schroeder, in the case of the Lakers right now, given how many injuries they're dealing with, you need that guy to score. He can do that. So it's obviously not what I think the people are there for, and it's not quite what you're expecting to see. But I mean, look, somebody's got to score in lieu of these injuries, and I think those are two guys who, like we said, they will always give themselves the green light on the offensive end. Part of Schroeder's growth for me that I've liked in the past few years is that he's kind of become a more of a well-rounded player, not just the kind of the chucker he was in Atlanta. It started really the past 2 years. Oklahoma City is really when it kind of started to see it a little bit more. But I mean, that's what I mean. That's why I liked him so much as a great pickup for the Lakers this year, is that he's been less of that, even though he kind of needs to be right now. So for Utah's next five they have the Lakers again on Monday night in LA. They've got Houston, they've got a pair against Minnesota, and they've got Sacramento. So that is huge. I mean, you in theory, even with them being down, you still should win 4 of those games. Like you should at least split it the worst with Minnesota, and I feel like they should be able to beat Sacramento even as well as De'Aaron Fox is playing, and you got to beat Houston. And with the Lakers down too, it took overtime for the Lakers to win the other night. Like you certainly have the opportunity to get that game. And then they've got Phoenix, Toronto, and back-to-backs of San Antonio. All those games are going to be tough, and then it doesn't really get any easier the rest of the way. Their last 2 of the season are against Oklahoma City and Sacramento, so that could be huge as well. But I mean, that game with Phoenix coming up in a couple is going to be obviously massive for standing purposes. I do think Phoenix probably ends up with the 1 seed now. Again, just a game and a half back. I think they'll play a little bit better down the stretch than Utah will, and so they'll end up with that number 1 seed. And I've always kind of liked Phoenix's chances to come out of the West anyway, or to really challenge the Lakers the most, given how Chris Paul. Like I'm done betting against Chris Paul teams. Put it that way. If everybody's healthy, like, and we can get into that in a little bit. But like you said, because of Utah's depth this year, because of the cushion that they built themselves by playing this well, I don't really think you need to worry about the rest of the regular season as much. Get Donovan Mitchell healthy. You trust your system and go into the playoffs. And because I do think that this is the best chance they're going to have really in a while. Like, I think you're going to see what this core is made of this year. Like, if everybody is healthy, this is the year where Utah should, in theory, go as far as they've ever gone in the playoffs.
Yeah. And I'm interested to see what it's going to look like, because I really want them to match up against one of these teams that we think are bona fide, NBA championship caliber teams. Like, if they cruise through and get Phoenix and they don't get either of the LA teams, or they, now without Jamal Murray, the Jamal Murray with the Denver team with Jamal Murray, like, I want to see how good they actually are, because if they skip over those teams and just play Phoenix and then whoever else and get to a final, I'm gonna be sitting there, I'm like, are they actually still that good? Like, I have a lot of questions about them, so I'm interested to see how good they actually are, and I hope they get to meet up with one of the LA teams, and not Denver anymore, but still just to really gauge how good it is, because there's a huge conversation to me about Donovan Mitchell. Like, this guy came in as a rookie and scored 20 points a game. Like, we don't talk about him as like a Luka Doncic or a, Jason Tatum type dude, like an all-timer, but like, his stats his first 4 years in NBA have been very impressive. Like, I'm looking at him now on Basketball Reference, like 20 points, 23 points, 24 points, 26 points. Like, this guy is starting to build a first ballot Hall of Fame career. And we don't talk about him like that. And if this team, really cements their legacy and beat the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals, and then goes to the finals and gives Brooklyn 6 or 7, and Donovan it looks like, everything we think he can be, he's going to start to cement himself as a top 5, top 10 player in this league, and one of the all-time dudes of this generation. And we don't talk about him like that, but his numbers are that kind of dude.
No, it's really just like a league-wide disrespect thing. It feels like I know you never need to tell Utah that they feel disrespected. Put it that way. Like, they're pretty vocal about that, and like, to the point where sometimes it does feel a little insufferable. And I'm like, guys, we get it. You're really good. You don't need to be a please like my team type deal. But with Donovan Mitchell, the All-Star game getting picked last with Rudy was crazy. Like, Rudy, I understand, because Rudy's game is not really tailored for an All-Star game. I understand that, but with Donovan Mitchell, it's like, wait a minute, hang on here. Like, Donovan Mitchell's one of the better ISO players in the NBA. Like, him going last is pretty wild, and in that last round. But no, I agree with your point. He's definitely building a Hall of Fame caliber career. There's no doubt about that. And they have the potential to go far this year if they're healthy. I don't think there's any scenario where you're going to run into somebody. In the first round, no matter what, even if you get Memphis or if you get Dallas, there are still reasons to be like, that's not a sweep. This isn't some 8 seed that you're going to roll over some under 500 team. I guess the question is, they're going to run into somebody in the second round right away. Like, even if it's Portland, even if it's, it feels like you're going to get one of the LA teams though, or you're going to get Phoenix. And to me, when you're talking about those 3 other teams, like, you're going to have to beat at least 2, in my opinion, championship caliber teams to come out of the Western Conference. Like, I just don't think there's any scenario where they can avoid it all the way to the conference finals. Where, like, I think in the Eastern Conference, for example, if you're the Sixers or if you're Milwaukee or Brooklyn and you get this number 1 seed, there are scenarios where maybe you don't have to play the best competition to get to the Western Conference final, or to get to the conference finals. Where in the West, I don't feel like there's that for anybody.
So if they right now, realistically, they could play the Memphis Grizzlies in the first round, the Denver Nuggets without Jamal Murray, and then Phoenix Suns. You're telling me if Utah rolls through those 3 teams in the Western Conference, that we wouldn't think like, well, LeBron was a little injured. They didn't get the Lakers. They didn't get the Clippers. I think I would look at that team with a lot of question marks still. I'm like, yeah, they beat Chris Paul in a Phoenix Suns team that has never been to a playoffs before. Like, DeAndre Ayton and Devin Booker have never made it to the playoffs before. And then they beat a Denver Nuggets team without their second best player in Jamal Murray. And they beat a Memphis Grizzlies team that aren't good. Like, I would look at that team with question marks. So that's why I bring that up. I would think, well, if they would have got LeBron and AD with the Lakers, they were were fully healthy, or if they would have got the Denver Nuggets and Jamal Murray was there, I don't know if they would beat them. And that's my issue, or that's the thing I'm worried about, because I do think this team is really good. And I do think that they're capable of beating the best teams in the West. I just think that there's a scenario where they get to the finals and they don't go through the best team in the West. And imagine if that happens and they lose to the Nets in 5. Like, we're definitely going to have a ton of question marks about them.
Yeah, if they get totally outclassed, and then I think we'd have question marks about that. But I really don't have any if they come out of the even if they just beat Phoenix, like that's, and then we're saying just beat Phoenix again. Like, this is a really good team. I think Phoenix could very well come out of this conference as well this year, and so that's one of those things where it's hard for me to have too many questions about any team that comes out of the conference, especially not in the bubble anymore. Like, you could say the bubble is what it is, but I don't know. To me, they would have that championship pedigree a little bit. I guess that, because that's, I mean, I look at Miami this year where I think you could have a ton of questions about Miami, for example, but because they went to the finals last year, I do give them more of the benefit of the doubt. And I do feel like they can turn it on at any given point. I know Jimmy Butler said they were playing soft the other day because of what they've lost like 2 or 3 straight. But I mean, even if the record doesn't show it, I mean, Miami right now is they're 7th. I would say they keep kind of going between like 6th, 7th, and 8th. I don't know. Like, I still wouldn't want to play Miami in the first round. I mean, if I'm Brooklyn, who right now is number 2, like, they're only a game back of Philly. That to me is why that number 1 seed is important, because I mean, if there's a scenario where Miami's an 8 or a 7, that's a much more difficult. Like, you can talk me into an upset potentially for one of those squads, where I wouldn't feel that way if I was playing Charlotte with LaMelo Ball hurt.
Yeah, I'm looking at this Miami seeding, and I really want them to play the Brooklyn Nets in the first round, because that would be so much fun. And honestly, I would say it goes 7. I would say a Miami Heat Brooklyn Nets series in the first round this year would go 7.
It would certainly be interesting. Like, it's not even. I mean, that's the thing, is like, if Jimmy gets going with how good they are defensively, with how well those role players can be, I don't think this is like, it's tough. Like, they're missing Jay Crowder a lot. And so I don't really necessarily have when they get, like, put it this way, I think they can play elite defense. Like, they have the tools to play elite defense, and come playoff time, that matters. I mean, I'm not as, like, I'm not as scared of Atlanta and New York, or even Boston, as crazy as that sounds, as I am of Miami. Now, Boston has Tatum, and the way Tatum and Jaylen Brown are playing, that's the thing. Is like, I'm never going to rule them out, because those two alone can drop 80 if they get going. Like, so it's hard for me to pick against that duo necessarily. I mean, especially Tatum. Tatum was great against Golden State last night, and they survived an absolute Steph Curry onslaught of 47 points. But I mean, Atlanta to me is still in a prove it mode, even though they're playing really well under Nate McMillan. Charlotte again is missing players. Gordon Hayward's hurt. New York is really good, man. I'll say that. New York plays tough. I don't think they're going to beat anybody, but I love the steps that RJ Barrett has taken this year. I think they're really well coached. The concern for me would be the big men, and I'm monitoring Nerlens Noel. He apparently hurt his wrist today. We're obviously recording this podcast and not watching the game with them in New Orleans, but they're playing really well this year, and I wouldn't want to play. Like, the Knicks would be annoying as hell in the first round for anybody that's going to play them, whether it's Milwaukee, whether it's Philly, whether it's Brooklyn. But that's the thing, is just like, I still think Miami, for better or for worse, is the best of those squads.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think the Knicks are just tough defensively, and they're so disciplined. They're going to play extremely hard all the time. My question is, are they going to get enough buckets in the playoffs to keep up with these elite teams? Like, they're gonna play defense, but I don't think they can score with the upper echelon of the East. Actually, you brought something up here that I want to talk about real quick, and I just a quick question that popped into my head. Is Jaylen Brown better than Jason Tatum? Because I really think he is. Like, if you consider two ways, if you consider scoring ability, like they're like, Jason Tatum's averaging what, like 26, and Jaylen Brown's averaging 24.5. Jaylen Brown's a significantly better defender than Jason Tatum. Like, I'm starting to get to the point, like, these guys aren't necessarily a 1 and 2, and more like a 1A 1B kind of situation. I really think Jaylen Brown doesn't get enough respect here, because, like, the more and more I watch him, the more and more fun I think he is. And Jason consistently is inconsistent in the way he decides to play offense.
So I think when Tatum is locked in on the defensive end and he's in his zone, I think Jason Tatum still has, put it this way, like I think Jason Tatum has a higher ceiling still. But I agree with your assessment that I think they're a 1A and a 1B. Like we're splitting hairs here. And I guess that's my point is like, yeah, no, Jaylen Brown is every bit as good as Jason Tatum. Jason Tatum gets all the press, but like Jaylen Brown is an all-star this year. Like you said, I do think he's a better defender as well. But I don't really think, like, I don't think this has been a 1 and 2 for a while. Like Jaylen Brown is just what's most impressive about Jaylen Brown to me is that like Jason Tatum came in the league dominating. And I guess maybe that's why we just, because he was so good right away and because that team was don't successful, we maybe haven't appreciated his development a little bit. Like Jason Tatum was scoring only 15 points as recently as 2 years ago. Like he's a 26 a game point scorer. And I think Jason Tatum, when he's locked in on the defensive end, is really good. I mean, his defensive box plus minus is in the negative this year. That is worth mentioning. He's a minus 0.3 defender overall, but his overall box plus minus is 3.9. His WARP is a 2.7. Jaylen Brown just was so much rawer when he came in. And I mean, the athleticism was there all the way. And in that sense, I do think Jaylen Brown can do a little bit more than Tatum can. And that's kind of why I think he's a bit of a better defender. But I mean, it's not like he's that, like his defensive box plus minus is actually worse than Tatum's this year. I mean, it's a minus 0.8. His overall box plus minus. I mean, the offensive growth out of Jaylen Brown, I guess, is what's been really cool. And where, I mean, they're not really that much different on that side of the ball. And I feel like we thought Tatum was that much better, where it's like, no, Jaylen Brown is that good of an offensive player as well. I mean, we just saw it this week. They traded 40-point games, essentially. And so I think this is a situation where if you had Jaylen, like, they just kind of switch nights, I guess. Is like Jaylen Brown, I still think Tatum's ceiling is a tiny bit higher, I guess is my point. But we are splitting hairs here a little bit. And I think that it is a 1A, 1B situation, and that 1A and 1B may very well alternate by games. There may be situations where one of them is a little bit better for the week, but I think overall they're the same type of caliber of player. And I do think the national media is coming around on Jaylen Brown, and the casuals are coming around on Jaylen Brown a little bit, where it's like, no, he's every bit as good. And I think that's why no one has really written Boston off yet, is because that duo is so good. I mean, it's as rough as the role players have been. And, you know, Kemba was great the other night, but even where Kemba has shown signs of decline a little bit, those two guys will keep you afloat and can win games by themselves. And that's why, you know, I'm not going to rule Boston out either the way I am with Miami. I just think that duo is too good.
I really wish Boston would have gone out and tried to get Chris Paul. Imagine Chris Paul on this team.
They would probably be the favorites, in my opinion, or at least as highly talked about as Brooklyn would be.
Like think about the year Devin Booker's having and compare him like talent-wise, or what you think perception of his talent, and you apply that same sort of growth to Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Like you're talking about both of those guys in conversations to be MVP, and this team being probably the favorite in the East at least. I don't know. That's just that's how highly I think of Chris Paul, but like how highly these guys actually their talents are. And I was looking, like you mentioned Boston. I went to go look at a couple of their things, and I noticed how good Jaylen Brown has been this year, and it's really impressive. And I just wanted to bring that up because I think he does not get the recognition he deserves.
Yeah, no, he's been phenomenal. He's playing at an all NBA level. He's one of those guys. Real quick with the Knicks too, and because this will transition us kind of into the Lakers a little bit. And before that as well, I agree with your Chris Paul point. That graphic was floating around this week about how literally every team Chris Paul has gone to has gotten better. And we'll talk about a little bit more Chris Paul once we get into the Lakers, in the sense of, you know, who they match up with well the most. But he's a former Laker real quick, and just because he's been killing, we're not doing who's balling, who's falling this week. But Julius Randle, my God. I mean, I've always liked Julius Randle, but I didn't think he was this, like, there is no scenario where I thought Julius Randle almost was a little overpaid at this point. I thought he was a good player, but it was like, wow, man, the Knicks gave him a lot of money. That's crazy. I didn't even think in the best possible scenario Julius Randle would ever have a season as good as he's been having this year. I mean, he's probably going to win the most improved player award, in my opinion. Like, I've never seen a situation where a guy may like be the most improved player and just morph into this all NBA player the way Julius Randle has. I mean, he's been absolutely dominant.
Julius is funny, man, because I remember when he came in the league, he obviously missed that first season because I think he got injured in the first game of his career for the Lakers. But I got to watch him. First of all, I have a couple different viewpoints. Is I was sold a different build of goods when we got Julius Randle. I was told he was the next Zach Randolph, when he was actually the next Draymond Green. So I was expecting a different player. So it took me a while to get used to who Julius Randle was, because I was expecting that bully in the paint, really just going to get super aggressive and get to the hoop. But that's not who he was. But the thing was, he never shot threes. Like, he shot, like, I think collective, like, less than 1 3 a game his entire Laker career. And now he's shooting something like 6 or 5 threes a game, and he's shooting at a 41% clip this season. And that, to me, is the difference of who he is as a player. Is if he can knock down 2 of those 5 threes a game, he's going to be able to blow past guys who are playing the 4 position, because he's more athletic than most power forwards in the NBA. So if you have to stay true on his 3-point shot, he's going to blow by you, and he's just aggressive, athletic, and can finish at the rim. So if he continues that sort of shooting for the rest of his career, he's going to be this all-star level player for the rest of his career. And that's the biggest question mark.
He never averaged more than 1 his entire 4 years with the Lakers. You're absolutely right. And even the year with the Pelicans, he didn't average 1 a game. He was right around it. The first year at the Knicks, he averaged 1. With the Pelicans is when he started shooting a little bit. He averaged 2.7 a game with the Pelicans, but he was only making about 1 per game. And then he was averaging 3.6 last year with the Knicks, and then 5.1 this year. But it's just a percentage that's been the big difference. I mean, he shot 27% last year on almost 4 attempts. Like, he's shooting 41 on over 5 this year. I mean, that's a just drastic improvement. His overall field goal percentage is up. Like, I mean, his effective field goal percentage, I should say, is 52%. It's actually down from a couple more years. But like we said, it's just the range is there. And him being a legitimate 3-point threat has been so massive to the growth of his career. I just never would have expected that. Like, I've liked Julius as a player in the past, but I thought Julius was kind of a good energy bench guy. He's a legitimate bona fide all-star right now. And it's just really impressive to see him take this massive leap this season. Also, real quick, tweet me at Rafuse to Lose, tweet the Drive and Dish podcast at Drive and Dish NBA, and just tweet Julius, like Julius Randle. That's it. Put it in a sentence. Talk about a Julius Randle stat you like, whatever it may be, and we will pick someone at random this week to get a $25 NBA store gift card. Again, tweet Julius at me, Rafuse to Lose, and at the podcast, Drive and Dish NBA. We're going to put this on Facebook too, so comment Julius, do the same thing. Put it in a sentence, whatever your favorite stat may be. We're going to put that post up on Facebook, and we'll pick somebody at random this week to get a gift card.
Currently tweeting you right now. Can I win? No.
yeah, baby. We'll see what happens. They'll love that. The first one. It's rigged. It's a rigged election. But no, Julius Randle is Julius Randle's been absolutely cooking this year. Oh wow, you actually did this too. Impressive. The notification is right here on my phone as we're holding this.
I wasn't sure if I could win or not. I could use a $25 gift card.
I mean, listen, maybe on an episode down the line. We got a couple of these to give away. We got 5 to give away. So
give it to the people. The people deserve it.
But so I'll Venmo you $25 on your birthday or something. Don't worry, I'll make it up to you. But so
I'll take a Funko Pop toy instead. Actually.
Oh, there we. Oh, I'm so glad you're at your desk right now.
Man, they keep them. I have a whole little corner here of little shenanigans. This is going on YouTube. I'll show the people. My stuff.
Yeah, show them. I was saying, do it. I'll show your desk off now. There we go. Look at Lamar. Lamar's right there. Hector Bellerin chilling. I like it.
Nice. It's nice.
So switching to your Lakers here a little bit. Obviously, Anthony Davis is on the verge of coming back, so it's some good news there. LeBron, we know how it is. He's going to take his time, get ready for the playoffs. The Lakers aren't playing for the regular season. The Lakers are 5 as of recording this right now. I've gone on the record. If there's nothing else I've said on the podcast this entire season, is that I think the Lakers, when healthy, are the best team in the NBA. My mood hasn't changed on that. I don't think seeding matters for them. Of course, I'm sure they'd love more home games when you're playing teams like the Clippers, when you're playing teams like the Suns. But I guess so I'll ask you in 2 parts. And, first, how concerned are you about the health long term? We do have Anthony Davis coming back. We do have LeBron coming back. I guess on like a 1 to 10, how concerned are you about that going into the playoffs? With the role guys now, with bringing in Andre Drummond and then still having Dennis Schroeder, and with Kuzma playing extremely well, like how we've seen these guys stay afloat. And then the follow-up question, of course, is we've been talking about them the whole pod with Utah, with Phoenix, with the Clippers, with Denver, even with post Jamal Murray. Who do you think is the biggest threat to actually knock the Lakers off come playoff time? If it's in the Eastern Conference or in the Western, I should say.
I think if we're healthy, I don't think there's really a threat now because each of these teams are flawed. I think maybe Utah is the scariest to me. Before it was Denver, like it was honestly Denver before with Jamal Murray healthy. Because the Clippers to me aren't a good basketball team, even though they've kind of fixed some stuff now with Rondo over there and they've been playing better. But I've just seen too much with the Clippers to believe that they're going to turn this around. Um, just take Kawhi out of that equation because none of that applies to Kawhi. Everything else applies to everything other than Kawhi from those statements. As far as if Donovan's back, I think it's Utah just because they have so many guys that could beat you night in and night out. Like if Donovan's not hitting shots, like Joe Ingles could drop 30. Like he can. So can Bogdan. So can Mike Conley. So can even Royce O'Neal can give you 20. Like they have just a bunch of guys on their team that could get you some points every now and then. So I think just based on depth and the ability of just not shutting down one player, because to me with Phoenix, if we isolate DeAndre Ayton on the defensive end and we try to focus on stopping Devin Booker, we could probably beat the Phoenix Suns, and we have the bodies to actually do that. With the Clippers, like I said, I don't trust them. With Denver without Jamal Murray, they don't have another bucket getter, I think. So it really comes down to me is the Utah Jazz because they have the guy that will give Anthony Davis a little bit of fits with Rudy Gobert. They have a bunch of playmakers to score with us, and they have a couple decent bodies to throw at LeBron. Like people forget, but Bogdanovich gave LeBron trouble before. Like this, like he's defensively has been someone who has given LeBron trouble before in the playoffs. So, I would say Utah are the scariest team. And as far as the health thing goes, I'm not really worried about it right now. And you could spin this both ways. You could spin this like if when LeBron and AD come back, they have to reintegrate to the squad. But as an optimist, I'm gonna spin it the opposite way, where this run now with our second unit really being, the primary offense and actually the first unit, they're getting more comfortable. Like Dennis Schroeder has stepped up a ton. Andre Drummond has proved to be, is going to be a pretty big piece of this team moving forward. And the more and more they establish themselves and get used to themselves and really feel comfortable with being the best second unit in the NBA, then the better our team is going to be long term. Because I don't think LeBron and AD are going to have trouble reintegrating into the squad. Like I think Dennis and Montrez and Drummond and KCP are all going to benefit from having this prolonged, dependency for us to win games. Like we're dependent on them to play well to win basketball games, where we weren't if LeBron and AD were healthy. So I'm gonna take it as that because I think that's really what's happening right now, and I'm gonna take that as a benefit.
Well, the fact they haven't cratered is really everything that needs to be said, right? Like one of the reasons I think this Lakers team is even better than last year's team because of the depth. Like that was what was so impressive to me is that the depth got so much better, and it's just proven it again this year. Like you brought back all the main role guys, sans Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee, but you got Marcus Gasol and you've got Andre Drummond and you've got Trez now, so you don't worry about there's no loss on the big man side of it. I mean, Kuzma's been really impressive this year. There were moments last year where he wasn't. He's been able to fill in really effectively this year. Like you said, I'm just, and Schroeder is exactly who he was on OKC. Like he's playing that 6-man role that they need him to play. I'm not worried about those two coming back in. I mean, obviously it's only going to help them. And like you said, if they're healthy, I don't think anyone is beating them. But I agree. I thought Denver was the team that would have given them the most trouble. I do think the Clippers, I know we're still in playoff improvement mode, but man, Paul George is cooking right now. Now he's got to do it in the playoffs, but like Paul George looks like Paul George. And if that continues, I did like that Rondo pickup a lot for them. So I do think I have the Clippers just slightly over Utah in terms of the threat, but I do agree. I like Utah's depth a lot. Conley's a guy as well with a lot of playoff experience. He's had some big moments. He's a guy who, like Donovan, can kind of take over at the end of games. So I feel really good about them as well. But again, we'll see. The Western Conference playoffs are going to be fun. I just hope everybody's healthy. That's the biggest thing. And getting these guys back healthy, well, that's what it's most important about. So I don't think we're really as worried about regular season seeding here. But I mean, yeah, the Lakers, to me, the biggest threat to the Lakers is Brooklyn, assuming Brooklyn goes through the Eastern Conference. I don't want to jump the gun, but when you look at the teams in the Eastern Conference as well, if they were to come out, I mean, you'd rather play Philly or play Milwaukee over Brooklyn, right? Like this isn't. I mean, trust me. I think this
Milwaukee
Sixers team,
definitely.
I mean, yeah, I think the Sixers, and I mean, not to sound like a homer, but I think the Sixers and Brooklyn by far are the two best teams in the East.
Yeah.
And then at that point, I don't know. Like, I just trust. I do think the Sixers match up really well with the Lakers in the sense that Embiid can give, I think Embiid can give Anthony Davis fits. We've seen Embiid dominate Andre Drummond in the past as well. And I do think you can put Ben on LeBron, but I just trust the Lakers' depth a little bit more. The Sixers' depth has stepped up recently as well. But I mean, the Sixers and Brooklyn, if they do end up playing each other in the ECF, it's going to be that classic offense-defense battle. But I don't know. I would assume the Lakers are the favorites in a series against Philly, where I would have them beating Brooklyn. But I mean, that's to me is a 7-game toss-up. There's nothing definitive there.
Yeah, I think if we match up against Philly, if I was Frank Vogel, I would sort of just let Joel do whatever he wants. Like, you stick, I almost don't even want to put AD on him. Like, I kind of just leave Drummond and Marc Gasol playing defense on Joel Embiid and let him score 50 a night. It's going to come down to, can Tobias Harris score enough points if we're putting LeBron on him? And I don't think he will. And that's why I think we would beat Philly, even though you're right, Joel Embiid would just dominate our bigs, but I would rather just let him dominate your bigs and see if you can get enough points from Ben Simmons and Danny Green and Tobias Harris. And Tobias Harris has been playing really well again under Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers just knows how to get Tobias Harris.
He does.
Clicking.
It's unbelievable. Like, how I feel about. Like, I've complained to you so many times about that contract. I'm not complaining about it. This is best case scenario with that Tobias Harris contract. He's been phenomenal. He's been our closer, essentially. He comes in the fourth quarter. He's been efficient. He looks confident. That's the biggest thing for me is he's stepping into three-pointers. He's finishing in transition. Like, he's just doing things he wasn't doing last year. He looked totally out of sorts. I don't know what it is with Doc Rivers either, but look, if he's the Tobias whisperer, it's working. He's playing the best basketball he's played since he got traded from a Doc Rivers team.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, Tobias is great, but we've seen bad Tobias. We've seen Tobias where he's not effective. And my question is, can this Tobias under Doc Rivers be that good when the entirety of winning basketball game relies on him getting 20 a night? Because you're going to give Embiid what Embiid gets. Like, let's just say, like, Embiid averages 50 a game. Where are you getting the other 50 from? If Tobias can't get you 25, then I don't think you guys are going to score enough points to keep up with the Lakers, even though Ben Simmons is going to affect, what we're doing with LeBron, even though Joel's a great defender. But if you play against Anthony Davis defensively on one side, are you going to have the energy to score 50 on the other side? So I think fit is, the schematics here, I think, lean more towards the Lakers than we'd give them credit for, even though no one can stop Joel on the Lakers roster.
Yeah, the Sixers, it all comes down to depth. I mean, and that's what it's going to be against Brooklyn as well, is that, I mean, I think Ben Simmons is arguably the defensive player of the year. I know that's going to open up a whole can of worms as well. But he's certainly in that conversation, but I think everyone probably knows at this point that, at least right now, I think if you're relying on Ben Simmons to score more than like 14 points a game, you're not really going to get it. Ben is about everything else. He plays that Draymond Green type of, it's what he does with everything else that makes the offense work. It's going to come down with the Sixers. It's going to be guys like Furkan Korkmaz. It's going to be Shake Milton. It's going to be Seth Curry. It's going to be Danny Green. If you're getting consistent, like if you're getting 10 a night at it from all those guys, and in a situation like Furkan, for example, has been awesome the past 2 weeks, where I think he's been averaging like 16 a game the past couple of weeks and playing better defensively. If you have that, and then you have Matisse Thybulle in there playing elite defense, like that to me is where you have a real life situation because of how well Embiid is playing, where you can win these games. But if you're not getting those contributions, like if you're getting a cold Seth Curry night, if Danny Green is 1 of 9 from beyond the arc, then yeah, it's like there's just not that margin for error the way the Lakers have, that I think the Sixers are going to have if they're going to beat a Brooklyn and a Lakers combo. I think they're going to have a chance. Like, I think the Sixers can take both these teams 7, but I wouldn't have the Sixers be I wouldn't have them as the favorites in either of these series, as much as my heart wants me to have them as the favorite in these series. I just don't have to, I can't call that right now.
So if the Sixers get to the Eastern Conference Finals and compete against a Brooklyn Nets team, do you think this season is a success? Like, are you happy as a Sixer fan?
I think you're disappointed just because of how good they've looked at times, and because you want to see them get to the final, and because it's been a long time. I mean, that's the reality. Is the Sixers haven't been to the finals. Yeah, since 2001, they haven't really played. I mean, they've been in the playoffs the past couple of years. The year after 2001, they won a playoff series in 2002. But the reality is they haven't really played that much meaningful basketball as a franchise since the 80s. I mean, in the 90s, they weren't really doing much of anything, even with Charles Barkley. And then even with the early AI years, it wasn't like they were super dominant or anything like that. But it's tough because I think the NBA is so talented that people are going to be predispositioned to view that as a failure when it's really not. Like, there's so many teams this year where it would be hard for me to, like, if you go to the conference finals and you're one of the 4 best teams in the NBA, I just think people don't realize how hard it is to win an NBA championship and how difficult it is, especially if you don't have the best players. Like, any team that's had LeBron makes it look easy because LeBron is so great. If Brooklyn coasts through this, it's why? Because you have 2 of arguably the top 5 players in the league. And then, oh, by the way, Kyrie Irving, who's not exactly a slouch either, with a ton of depth. Like, that Sixers team is probably the most, I mean, there's a case for this year's Sixers team to be the best Sixers team I've ever seen in my lifetime. But if they don't go to the finals, I don't know that people will view it that way because they didn't go to the finals, which isn't necessarily fair either.
They are the best Sixer team of your lifetime, I think.
I think they are too. I mean, Iverson
there's
won
a better
MVP.
version. Actually, the JJ Redick team early on in the process, I think that team might have been more talented depth-wise. Yeah.
Well, yeah, true with Jimmy. I mean, because to me, I mean, I've said
the coaching is what didn't put them over the top, and I think the maturity of Ben and sort of the realization of Ben of who he is as a basketball player has come in the past couple seasons, and the maturity of Joel Embiid as being that dominant offensive force that was still a question mark when Jimmy and JJ were there, but I think talent-wise, that was probably the most talented team.
No, this is the leap that any Sixers fan had dreamed Joel would make. Like, Joel is just going out and being the basketball equivalent of Godzilla. It's like, no, I'm bigger than everyone. I'm stronger than everyone. I can move like a guard. And I mean, Joel Embiid is playing an antiquated. I mean, how many teams are running through the post like we are with Joel Embiid? But it just doesn't matter when he's scoring 30+ points a game. So, I mean, I think Jokic is still going to win MVP just because at the end of the day, he hasn't missed any time. Like, it's going to come down to games being missed with LeBron missing time.
Crazy.
And with Joel missing time, I think it's going to be a crazy race. But I do think Nikola Jokic is the MVP this year. It's unfortunate that I don't think they're going to go as far in the playoffs necessarily now, but that's just because Jamal got hurt. Like, I don't blame Jokic for that. They run the whole offense through him.
So Jokic will probably win the MVP, and I think he should. It's him or Embiid. But I think we need to talk about Chris Paul. Like, I get it, the stats aren't there. Like, he's averaging 15 a game. But Chris Paul has been the most valuable player in the Phoenix Sun organization since Steve Nash. Like, it's insane. This team was not good last year. They were good in the bubble for about 8 games, but anybody can go on an 8-game run. Like, he single-handedly has gone from franchise to franchise and has turned them around into competitive, competent, and sometimes great basketball teams. You saw what he did at Oklahoma last year, and you're seeing it again. Like, it's one of the reasons why I brought him up earlier in the conversation about the Celtics. Like, imagine Chris Paul there. Like, that team would just function so much more efficiently, and what he's doing in Phoenix again is turning around a poorly run franchise with a terrible owner. We talk about Robert Sarver all the time about how he's a bad owner. We're talking about James Jones as their GM. He's never been a GM. He took over the being the GM after playing in the league, like, immediately. Like, he took like a year between there. And we're talking about Monty Williams, who's a fine coach but has never really done anything in the NBA. Like, it's insane how Chris Paul, even though his points, his counting numbers aren't there, the value he brings to an organization is irreplaceable. Like, I don't understand the way that he's done it over and over and over again is so impressive. And I understand no one's ever going to give the MVP to a guy who averages 15 points a game, but, like, we should have this conversation.
I mean, he gives them instant legitimacy, and that's just what it is everywhere they go. Chris Paul gives that organization legitimacy. He's made them good. He's got the best out of Devin Booker and gotten the best out of DeAndre Ayton and Mikal Bridges and all these other guys that he's made them successful. Like, you just can't deny it. There's no way around denying it when it happens now. You know, we're talking on 5 organizations. This isn't some fluke anymore, and they very well could be the number 1 overall seed in one of the best Western conferences we've ever seen. That's just, you're right. That's not to be downplayed. Now, I don't think he's going to win the MVP award, but he should absolutely be in the discussion. And I agree that he's definitely being underrepresented in the discussion. I don't want to say that I'm going to pivot here real quick. I don't want to say that it's giving them legitimacy because I think the Jazz have been really good for a while. And, you know, we're talking about them again. They're first in the Western Conference as we're recording this podcast, but I love Dwayne Wade buying into the ownership group there and being a part of that. And to me, I mean, it's insane that he couldn't get in Miami at all. Like, I just don't understand how that happens. It's kind of the way that it's the way I felt when Dwayne Wade left the first time, where it's like, yo, how did this happen? Like, you just got to, you keep your icons as a lifer, you keep them within the organization. But I also understand it is a little bit different with business, and that, I mean, look at MJ, for example. You would, of course, I think everyone would love MJ to own the Bulls, but he owns the Hornets, and that sometimes you just got to get in where you can get in. But I mean, in an area like Utah needs to be cooler sometimes. I think, to put it bluntly, like, I feel like they don't have that. They don't have that rep, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Is, that's a joke, and it is a shame, because, like we said, the Utah team this year is really, really good, and they should be appreciated for who they are. There's a chance they go and win the finals this year, but I mean, with Dwayne Wade, I just think he adds that factor there, and him bringing in, like, we talk about what Chris Paul brings to that locker room in Phoenix. I think Dwayne Wade, just by affiliation here and now with the ownership, brings that to Utah. And obviously, he already had the Donovan Mitchell connection. So, I mean, they've had that since he's came into the league. But I mean, that's the type of draw that makes Utah a free agent destination. Like, that to me is how small market teams should be operating, and how you can, put yourself into these conversations that the Lakers will get all the time, that Miami will get all the time, that, New York, if they continue this run of success, will get all the time. Like, that's what you have to do. And I think that's a great move by Utah's organization.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you can get more player representation and ownership, the better the league will be. Like, it's just the league has been more developed and more leaning towards the player. And as soon as it elevates into the players and ownership, you're gonna get, remember the whole thing about how MJ was one of the reasons why the league broke through during the pandemic, and I think it was during the after the Jacob Blake shooting in Kenosha, right? Like, MJ was a leading voice to connect the ownership and the players during that moment. And the more players you have, the more representation you have in ownership, the easier it is to connect with the players and develop a better league. So I'm all for a guy like Dwayne Wade, being a part of a team. Do I think it's gonna, help Utah be a better free agent destination? I don't. Like, it's Utah. Like, it might help Donovan Mitchell re-sign there after he's done, he's done with his rookie extension. Like, that might help. But I don't think guys are gonna go play in Utah just because Dwayne Wade's an owner. Like, the same thing happened with Michael Jordan in Charlotte. No one wants to go play in Charlotte because Michael Jordan's the owner of the Hornets. So I don't think that there's an effect in that way, but I think it helps in the broader scope of the league.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with I don't necessarily agree with that last part, but I agree with everything you said about player representation. Like, that's definitely super. And Dwayne Wade, of course, has been somebody. I mean, I always go back to that speech before the ESPYs back. I think it was after Ferguson, when it was him and LeBron and Carmelo and Chris Paul. Like, he's a leader. He's been a leader on and off the court. I mean, not just with that as well. Obviously, with with his transgender son and with everything that's happening there. He's been vocal about a lot of these issues. These are important issues, and I think, just again, it adds legitimacy to them. Sam B. Albuquerque, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for everybody for listening to this episode of the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. Thanks for Sam for joining me again. Congratulations to my pal Justin for getting married. Send congratulations to him as well. Tweet him. I know he's going to be on his honeymoon. I think his fiance might kill him if he's checking his phone, but tweet him. He'll see him when he gets back. And of course, we'll see him in a couple weeks as well. Follow Sam on Twitter at Sam B. Albuquerque. Of course, check out the Take a Left at Albuquerque podcast. Follow me on Twitter at Refuse to Lose. Find the podcast anywhere you can find a podcast. Leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad. Or read them on the podcast. Watch the video on YouTube. Subscribe to the Drive and Dish NBA channel. Tweet us, Julius, me, and at the Drive and Dish NBA podcast account, or put it in a sentence on Facebook on the post that we'll be putting up, and you could win a $25 NBA store gift card this week. Sam, before I get you out of here, of course, the big Brazilian baller who got me back into soccer, I do have to ask you, I'll hit you with one fastball, of course. The Champions League, we got 4 squads left. We got Chelsea, we got Man City, we got PSG, and we got, oh my God, why am I blanking? Real Madrid, excuse me, thank you, there it is. We got 4 squads left. Who do you think is going to win this thing? Call your shot right now. Like, who do you think is the favorite to win going on? Of course, Chelsea will be playing Real, and Man City will be playing PSG. Who do we like? If you were picking one of these squads, who do you think's got the best chance?
So the best team here, I think, is Man City. But there's a conversation about being there and having done it before. And Zinedine Zidane has won 3 Champions Leagues in his short time as Real Madrid manager. That team isn't necessarily more talented or deeper, especially after Ronaldo left a couple years back, than a Man City or even a PSG. But that majority of that squad has been there and has done that, and they have the easiest path to get there. I'm sorry about your Chelsea team, but they're the worst team in the bunch right now. They are, and so I think Real Madrid has the easiest path to get to the final. They've been to I don't know how many finals in recent years. I think they're probably my pick right now, even though I hate Real Madrid. I think it's Real. I really do, and it would be funny to see a team like Chelsea get through, but I think Real Madrid just have so much experience, so much depth, and I think in knockout style tournaments, Zinedine Zidane is probably the best manager in the world right now.
So obviously Real's won this a ton of times. Chelsea's won it once in 2012. That's been, I mean, Man City's won everything recently, except that's the one thing they haven't won.
Yeah.
Where we've seen Chelsea win, we've seen Liverpool win, we've obviously seen Arsenal win in the past. And compare that to PSG, got there last year, lost to Bayern in the final. They haven't won either, despite all their, Ligue 1 dominance. Who do you think has more pressure of those two squads to get it done this year?
That's tough, actually. That's a really tough question because I would have said PSG before these conversations about Neymar re-signing his contract, because both Neymar and Mbappe are going to be free agents, I think, this season or next. Or
Yeah.
they're in the final stages of their contracts with PSG. But according to the Woj of soccer from Fabrizio Romano, he has said that Neymar will sign his deal, so there's less pressure there on PSG. And it's the same thing with Man City. Like Pep, has re-upped with Manchester City. They're going to sort of go through this project. It's hard to say. I'm going to lean towards Manchester City just because we expect more from them, because they've been so dominant in the Premier League, whereas PSG have been dominant in a league that many refer to as a farmers league. So I'm going to lean towards Man City just because they've been on this project for a longer time. They've been more respected. They've won more titles in a more dominant league. I'm going to go Man City.
The couple of Man City fans I know were real stressed during the Dortmund game, and that's all I know is when they got tied up there and they looked like, I mean, obviously they ended up winning, but it looked like they were going to lose on aggregate and on away goals. It was I could feel the stress. So I mean that's my general inkling, but obviously you're a lot more well versed in this than me. Sam B. Albuquerque, ladies and gentlemen, again follow him on Twitter at Sam B. Albuquerque. We'll catch you guys next week.